All right, cool. We're live. I'm here with Nicholas. And hey, I really want to hear some of your background because I know we connected on Mighty Networks in the Zero to Dangerous and FTA group through Messenger. And now we're like, face to face, kind of, cam to cam.
You
And
could say.
I kind of want to hear some of your background and what you've been up to with like the neuroscience and all that good stuff that we kind of briefly went over in the DMs.
Now I just keep it quite brief. So my main role is actually as a neuroscientist. So I'm a PhD student and I basically develop and test a drug to treat Alzheimer's disease. And in brief, this means that I do cell work and I do animal work. And the idea is to check whether the drug actually works. I'm almost done with it, so I will write those results up. And besides that, of course, again, Flow Research Collective, of course, that's where we met, obviously. Uh, and I also have, of course, ambitions to become a high performance coach because I see it in two ways. On the one hand, of course, there's the biological side. So I want to help those people that have memory loss, experience memory issues by developing a drug because my own grandmother had dementia.
Wow.
And on the other hand, we have, of course, the uh, psychological side, because there are many people out there who struggle with depression, which I had myself, in fact. And the idea of the coaching is then again to help those people as well from a psychological standpoint to become their very best. And that's why I started the entire thing here. And that's why I basically joined the Flow Research Collective and met you guys. You, Gemini.
It's amazing stuff, amazing stuff. And I love how you kind of went into um the depression aspect of it and the anxiety of even you experiencing that. I've experienced depression, and I actually was going through some of the Art of Impossible the other day, and he was talking about how self rumination is a nice trigger for depression. Always focusing on the self and not having that purpose and the meaning in life to give to others and serve to others. And I think knowing like the mechanisms and the neuroscience of things from your formal education and your studies, you could probably understand that a lot more than myself or a lot of other people.
Mm. Now, it's a difficult thing, but I think,
Right.
like you implied, knowledge is key. It's just if you know how things work, how the processes work in the brain. For example, if you know how dopamine works, how dopamine makes you motivated, for example. If you know that, then you can interpret the feelings better. If you know the reason behind why things are the way they are, then you can also be more relaxed. Again, it's just having this knowledge. It's basically giving you
Right.
confidence, let's say. So I think that's one of the advantages neuroscience has because it just does, you have millions of opinions out there. Everyone says something else. It's all subjective. But neuroscience, on the other hand, it's biological. Like Steven says, biology scales. So basically, those things are truths, fundamental truths, like dopamine. Dopamine makes you motivated. If you have a lot of dopamine in your brain, then you're super motivated and driven. If you don't have much dopamine in your brain, you're not driven. And just knowing what causes that, what gives you a lot of dopamine, what gives you a low amount of dopamine, for example, just knowing that is so helpful. And again, it's the same with passion and purpose. With flow, definitely, if you know how to get into flow, it's easy to get into flow. I would say that makes sense. Don't you agree?
I 100% agree. Now let's go. Let's go to the dopamine because I think in our society with like Facebook, social media, the ringing, the phones, the TV, the Netflix, the music, all of this input stimulation and like caffeine and just I think there's a lot of abuse on the dopamine like system, the reward system, where so many people it's just been so abused. And we learned the dopamine detox in Zero to Dangerous before we got into like coaching high performance. Um, I would love for you to maybe go into some of the things that you've seen and learned um, in your experience, in your life, in your studies that maybe any listeners could really start utilizing in their lives, because I'm noticing a lot of like the depression and the anxiety, and I think a lot of that and the motivation stems a lot from the abuse of that, reward system with the dopamine.
Absolutely. Now, generally, as you said, you want to have it in a way that dopamine supports you in achieving your goals. The problem is that most people, also including myself in the past, didn't know how to manage your dopamine. And the problem is, again, there's a lot of stuff out there that releases a lot of dopamine in our brain. Social media, for example, is a big one, or news flashes, just watching the news. These are all things that release massive amounts of dopamine in our brain. And the problem is there's only one molecule that drives motivation. It's only dopamine. And the more of these dopamine producing things you have in your life, the more difficult it will be to get your dopamine from the things that you want.
Right.
Generally, it's like coffee. If you drink 5 cups of coffee, then a single cup of coffee doesn't boost you. It's the same in your life. If you have millions of things that release dopamine, you have the social media, you have the news flash, you have Netflix, whatever, then you have all of these things that compete, that release a lot of dopamine, and your dopamine sensitivity is just really bad. You basically become dopamine resistant at some point even. And then doing something that doesn't release much dopamine, like work, for example, that's hard. Because again, it's like the coffee analogy. If you drink 5 cups of coffee, then a single cup of coffee doesn't do much. And if you have all of these activities that compete with dopamine and release a lot more dopamine than what you actually want to do, than your work, than your goals, then you will probably not get very far. And again, that's the entire idea of dopamine detox. It really reduce all of those unnecessary activities that spike your dopamine. And once again, you learn to be content with as little dopamine as possible. It's like drinking no coffee at all, because when you not drink no coffee at all and you get a cup of coffee and then it boosts you like crazy. And it's the same thing with dopamine. If you don't have anything in your life that produces dopamine, but you do work, and you, for example, you read a book and you stumble on something new, something novel, that little bit of dopamine that the novelty gives you, that will be so intense, so immense for you, that it's really easy to keep doing it because you will be very motivated to do it.
Right.
And there's so many things you could talk about in terms of dopamine. For example, the fact that if you celebrate your rewards, you actually destroy your long-term motivation to do the task itself. So it's basically the fact that if you work for the reward, then you lose the motivation to do the task itself that gives you the reward.
Wow.
On the other hand, what we do at the Flow Research Collective is the opposite. We do the work because we love the work. We get our dopamine from the activity itself. The activity gets us into flow, which is addictive. So again, we learn to get our dopamine from doing the task itself, whereas most people get the dopamine from a big reward. They anticipate your reward, they want this reward, but if they get closer to it, if they actually get the reward, then it completely destroys the motivation to keep doing it, basically.
Right.
So there are many things you could talk about, but I think in general, managing your dopamine is probably one of the most difficult things. But when you learn it, when you learn to get your dopamine from the things that you love, from the activities that you love, then you definitely got it down.
It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's amazing. I mean, yesterday I was talking to Lisa, and we kind of went a little bit into this, and it came up where, so many people are destination driven instead of process driven. They're like, I want to. This is my goal of like, losing 35 pounds or building, getting to this destination, instead of saying, I want to be the person. My goal is to be the person that shows up every day and does these things and, has this process, like that process goal, instead of just the destination goal. And then even more so, like it's almost worse, because then you get to that destination, if you get there, and then now you just crash and you're like, well, what now?
That's exactly the thought that you get. That's what most entrepreneurs, for example, have when they accomplish a big goal. They get it, they get all of the dopamine from the reward, And then comes the slump, because the amount of dopamine you get is always proportional to how big the slump thereafter is. So they have this gigantic win, then they have the slump, and the problem is that they not only have this huge slump in dopamine, but there's no reward to go for anymore. So there's no reason to keep pushing. And that's why some people just fall in this hole after reaching their goals and don't know how to get out anymore. So that's one of the big issues. And like you said, really learning to get your dopamine from doing the thing. In your case, for example, enjoying the weightlifting, enjoying the healthy eating, things such as that, enjoying the process itself. That's
Right.
what we really want to learn also at the Flow Research Collective in terms of flow. So it's really a big thing.
Yeah, it's crazy to see, see how there's just the people who have that destination goal and the people who have the process goal. And I, for one, can say I'm guilty of the destination goal with like entrepreneurship, and like, you see like, Grant Cardone and Gary Vee and, Tom Bilyeu, and you see all these amazing things happening. You see, Elon Musk, and you see all these people doing these great big things, and you're like, wow, like, and then for anybody like us in this space, we know that we're capable of it, and we're human, we get caught up in things. And I know for me, for sure, I can say I'm definitely guilty of that in certain areas of my life. So yeah.
Me too, especially in the gym. I'm actually a power lifter. I come in back then. The reason I started lifting is because I wanted to get stronger, and my only motivation was to get as strong as the strongest guys in the gym. That was my only motivation. So I only wanted to lift those specific numbers, and I didn't give a shit about anything else, basically. But over time, I actually changed. Now I go to the gym because I love the gym, and I couldn't skip a single workout session. And I think it's really about learning to enjoy again what you do. And ultimately, you want to abuse it, because that's the whole point of this, to abuse dopamine a bit. So I think I will actually make a video about this that I will upload on my YouTube channel, in fact, also for everyone who is interested in the neuroscience of dopamine. But I think ultimately it comes down to, one, getting your dopamine from the activities that you do. So you need to love what you do. You need to love the challenge. You need to love pushing it. Just being 1% better every day, just a simple goal, or like Steven says, 4% better every day, whatever you aim for, but just aiming to be a little bit better every day, that gives you this little bit of dopamine, this little edge to enjoy the challenge itself. And in addition to that, you also want to abuse desiring more. You also want to get a bit of dopamine from desiring more in addition to that, because again, it's additional drive. That's where visualization, these things come into play. You have this big goal, you have this big, massive, transformative purpose that we at the Flow Research Collective set. And you can also abuse this to your advantage to get a little bit of dopamine from this big goal that you have. Because if you use it consciously, most people don't know, but if you use it consciously to get driven by this big goal, you would desire this big thing, but at the same time you enjoy what you're doing, if you combine both, then you get even more dopamine out of it. And I think that is ultimately probably the smartest way to do it. And on the other hand, just manage your dopamine well. Just avoid all of the activities, social media, that just increase your dopamine resistance, you could say. Avoid those so that you stay motivated and stay on track on what actually matters to you. It's a skill. It's really a skill, because also celebrating your rewards can destroy your motivation to keep going, funny enough. But on the other hand, if you never celebrate your wins, then you're also not motivated because you feel like you never make any progress. So actually, Andrew Huberman talks about that. It said you have a bit of an irregular celebrating schedule. You celebrate your wins sometimes, but not all the times. So these are all strategies, but again, managing dopamine is a big topic, and getting this down, that'll be amazing if you can do that.
Right. And I think for a lot of people that are listening in, and watching, they're probably struggling with that. The social media is big, and
Mm.
the notifications. I know we have our notifications off. Our phones don't make sounds, and they're not constantly ringing, buzzing, and distracting us, kicking us out of flow, and all that dopamine that comes from all those things. And the input stimulation with having like the black background and just cutting those things out. And it seems like in the world of like, especially like with fitness and entrepreneurship and like motivation in general, there's a lot of like do more, do this and that, and there's not a lot of talks about cutting shit out.
Mm. Actually, that's one of the lessons I've learned: elimination, cutting shit out, like you said. That's actually probably the most important skill in terms of productivity and in terms of dopamine and motivation that you can ever have. Because generally, a to-do list will grow. It will grow endlessly. But the more you can cut out, the more irrelevant shit you can cut out. So there's the 80% of irrelevant tasks, basically, and focus on the 20% of things that matter, the more productive you will be. And the same with dopamine. You want to cut out all of the dopamine stuff that's not related to your goal, but hone down on a few things that are related to your goals, and that give you the dopamine.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And I know, just going through the in zero to dangerous learning, cutting those things out, making changes, and then even more so the wall staring, staring at a wall for 20 minutes, doing that dopamine detox on a, daily and like weekly kind of basis really made a profound change in some of the things that I was doing. And I know that they have this example of, you know, 3,000 years ago, if you were to read a neuroscience textbook, it would be the most amazing, exciting thing in the world. Whereas if you were to read it now, it's boring. It's like, okay, so what?
Yeah, just grab a phone and watch some cat videos on Facebook. I don't know, more interesting. But it's the truth. It releases more dopamine than you would get from reading a book, as ironic as it is.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So yeah.
Oh man, and I would love to hear some of the stuff with the Alzheimer's and dementia that you've been researching, studying, and probably doing like studies in school. I'm guessing.
Now, one of the things I actually didn't even notice in the beginning, but I didn't know, that is that my own supervisor, Professor David Alsop, he was actually the first person in the world to isolate the plaques that form in the brain during Alzheimer's disease. So he was the first one to actually pull those plaques out of the brain of a patient. And he was even the one, or belonged to the ones, who set up the amyloid cascade hypothesis. So what that means is that he was one of the guys who set up this hypothesis that the plaques in your brain cause Alzheimer's disease. You mentioned it randomly in one of his talks. I didn't even know it, but he's actually an expert in this field, funny enough. Although I have to say that nowadays it's very clear that the plaques are actually probably not the cause of Alzheimer's disease. They contribute to the disease, but they are not the cause of memory loss. Because you see this in patients, you have Alzheimer patients with tons of plaques in their brain who have no, you have people with tons of plaques in their brain who have no dementia whatsoever. On the other hand, you have people with no plaques and that have memory loss, that have Alzheimer's. So there's no correlation between the amount of plaques you have in the brain and whether you have Alzheimer's or dementia. That alone tells you, the plaques, how important are they actually? We know that they are toxic because I've done this myself in the lab. That's if you throw those plaque materials, you throw them on brain cells and they die. That's very well researched. But again, it looks like the plaques are not the cause.
Wow.
So one of the things I can actually give you here, that's actually something that's not much known, but Alzheimer's is also known as type 3 diabetes. Because what happens during Alzheimer's disease is that you develop insulin resistance in the brain. And fun fact, type 2 diabetes, the lifestyle diabetes that many people have, is the biggest risk factor for dementia. So I think there's a strong link there. And the drugs in this field look very good as well, very promising. So that's just something I wanted to throw out, also because I partially work in this field. But then again, Alzheimer's ultimately is a combination of many things. You have the plaques, you have insulin resistance, you have neural inflammation, so inflammation in your body, you have oxidative stress. So basically, there are many things that you can actually address with a healthy lifestyle, in fact. So again, the healthy lifestyle that we flow enthusiasts have is not only to ensure our productivity, but it's also to ensure our brain health in the long term. So again, just having a good diet, making sure you don't have insulin resistance, that you do your exercise, which releases BDNF in your brain, for example. BDNF is also for nerve repair. So there are many different things, and I think the best thing you can do for Alzheimer's right now is to have a healthy lifestyle. It helps against cancer, it helps against dementia, it helps against cardiovascular disease. So just having a healthy lifestyle, as simple as it is probably the best thing you can do right now.
Wow, that's it's interesting seeing how all those things, compound, and just seeing how much of this is so prevalent with what's going on, and just health in general, and not just like health, but like mental health, you know.
Mm. There's a lot of depression, and for example, there's a strong link between your gut, your intestines, your microbiota, and the brain. You have probably heard of it, the gut-brain axis, I would
Right.
assume. You even have this in dementia, in Parkinson's disease, etc. In Alzheimer's, you have a deregulated gut microbiome. You have a leaky gut, and your gut can even release compounds that can cause plaque formation in your brain. So there's a strong link between your gut, your enteric nervous system, and your brain. So again, that's another reason why a healthy diet helps you, because it improves your gut health. It improves your microbiota, reduces inflammation, because inflammation, there's a lot of it actually in your gut. It's a big source of inflammation. So again, as you said, it all it's all it wants. So it all belongs together, basically. It all links together.
Right. So many people are, especially now with like social media and YouTube and the biohacking world, and this, do this one thing and end it all. And it's like, well, there's all of it together in the lifestyle, that holistic approach, your diet, your sleep, it's going into like the positive psychology, the sleep, hydration, nutrition, gratitude, relationships, exercise, nature, respiration, not just like, chest breathing, but, diaphragm breathing, those deep
Mm.
breaths from the stomach, and all those things make a very big impact in, I think, ways that a lot of people end up missing out on. It's so easy to, especially like when things get hard, when life gets real and you're challenged, it's so easy to cut things out like sleep, especially like with hustle culture and work, go, go, go. And I know for a little, I've had times where I felt guilty now, being busy or working and trying to get stuff done. And
Mm.
so much of that is just so easy to cut out, and then things kind of blow up, fall apart, and you kind of step back, slow down, and evaluate. You start doing these things and you kind of start getting back to baseline, and imagine if you're already at baseline, what those things can do for you to get even further ahead.
Mm. I had this when I had the productivity lesson, a bit of a revelation, you could say, but more the realization that working all day, just being busy, the hustle culture is not the way to go. Because the very definition of productivity is output divided by input. So input means the less time you invest and the more you get out, the more productive you are. So the idea of productivity is to work less, but to get more out of the time you work. And it's not to work more to get more. That's an entirely different idea. And in fact, if you increase the amount of time you spend, then you decrease your productivity. Because again, productivity is output divided by input. So the more you work, the lower your productivity is by definition. And the idea is work really to do it the other way around, so that you use the same amount of time that you would normally use, or maybe even less, but to make it more effective. And I think that's, of course, the idea that the Flow Research Collective also proposes. That's the idea to get into flow, because flow makes your work just 500 times or 500% more productive as they advertise. So once again, it's all about leveraging your time in a manner that is smart.
Yeah. And I remember when I first started Zero to Dangerous, and it was week 2, I think it was, and it was the second, Tuesday group call, and some guy gets on and he asks, I hear you guys throwing around this 500% more productive number, and how
Mm.
true is this? And one of the I think it was Heidi at the time. She was head of
Mm.
client success for FRC, and she came on and she was
Mm.
like, what we're seeing right now is the 500% more productivity through Zero to Dangerous from the graduates. They've seen in 95% of the graduates of Zero to Dangerous, which is about 5 hours extra of free time per day. And at first I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, all right, this is from somebody who's seeing the results and the testimonials. Think about week 4 or 5. Once I got really into the course and really started dialing things in, I was seeing an extra 5 hours a day. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with these extra 5 hours. Like, I have everything done. What do I do?
I guess you can enjoy wasting your time in that case.
Watch some cat videos.
Yeah, sure, why not? If you can. The problem with social media is that it either A, prevents you from doing what you actually want to do, or B, it distracts you while you work. Even said that to a client a while ago, but if you're not distracted by it, and if it doesn't suck off the time that you actually need to do your actual tasks, then you can spend your time however you want. You can watch your freaking cat videos in the evening if you have time for it. I think it's just really the idea that you want to get productive enough that you can spend a set amount of time for work every day that is comfortable to you. And then that you have the rest of your time that you can spend in the manner that you enjoy. If you enjoy cat videos, then by all means do it. I think it's just the idea that if it hinders you in accomplishing your goals, then it's problematic. And that is one of the examples here.
Yeah, and it's easy to get sucked into that world of reels and scrolling. And I knew a guy. He was like, "Man, I have to try to stay off YouTube because if I get on YouTube, I get into I get sucked into this like wormhole of like video after video and content and content. I don't get work done."
I actually have this weakness as well because I know it when I start watching YouTube, then I will not be productive. So I consciously only start YouTube past 10 p.m. I set myself a sharp time and I said until 10 p.m. I do not even open or click on YouTube because I know I've tried it. I was like, it's like I have like 30 minutes. I just watch a video, but it never stays just one video. It always is more and more. So YouTube is a weakness for me, for example, personally. So that's why I restrict it very strongly because once again, I don't want YouTube to interfere with my actual work. I have a lot of shit to do, in other words. But then again, once you have done your most important tasks of the day, then you can use the rest of your time to enjoy yourself. That is the way I approach it, at least. Because the work is important, of course, but life is not just about work. It's also about enjoying the other things in your life. So I think balance is key. And rule making definitely helps, honestly.
Yeah, that was the one big takeaway that I heard, and what you were saying was setting the boundary of my work is done, 10 p.m. Okay, now I can get into YouTube and some of the things that I
Mm.
enjoy. But if those, things, the criteria isn't met, then work has to get done. The important things have to get done, and I think it's so easy to just like grab your phone and YouTube and like watch some Netflix or YouTube and just kind of drift off and not really get that work done.
I think knowledge is really key here. Once you realize how bad it is for you while you work, I think the only thing you can do at this point is really making rules or track it very strictly. Because then again, as I said, you don't want it to interfere with what you do, but you want to enjoy it. So you need to find the middle way, ideally, which is ideally rule making to limited value at work, But once you have your most important stuff done, then you can hammer your brain basically with the cat videos if you want to. So basically do it afterwards.
The cat videos, that's me laughing. I saw some funny ones earlier today.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. For some reason, it's so stupid. It's almost a meme, but you still watch them, you know?
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, I think just that boundary, and that goes into everything, right? Like relationships, work, even hobbies. Like, what are you trying to do? And have fun, but then it's like that challenge, that flow trigger of challenge skills ratio, like that's gonna push you into that sweet spot of the flow channel and really get you more productive with that input output ratio.
I think definitely challenge is a big factor you mentioned there. I have this personally. I find that if I don't make it hard enough, if I don't stack too many tasks, then I'm not as motivated. Now, it might also be related to the fact that I'm more of an A-type personality, so I'm more of a push, push, push guy. And for me, I just need challenge. I need to feel that it's somewhat hard, that I need to push. And if I don't have this feeling, then I feel disengaged. For example, if it's like 6 p.m., I normally work until 10, but if it's 6 p.m. and I don't have anything to push, then I feel a bit unfulfilled, unsatisfied even. So I really crave this challenge. And it goes back to dopamine, as I said. Again, if you get your dopamine from work to be 1% better every day, I think that is a desirable trait for you if you want to be at your very best. Because let's face it, the best of the best, they strive to be a little bit better every single day. And if you make this a profession, like Steven says, to be a 1% or 4% better every day, whatever you want to see it, then you become world class. So ultimately, if you can maintain it, and if you can get your dopamine from the things you love, and if you can make the challenge a little bit harder every day, I think if you can do those two things, then over the long term, you will be very successful.
Yeah, and even to go a little bit, before that step, getting into like the values and the passion recipes, and really like understanding like the values, the filters that you base your decision making off of, and what you do, what you love, what's meaningful and important in your life, and then seeing those intersections. Going through something like the passions recipe and seeing
Mm.
the intersections between three to four things, because like people kind of like think, oh, this is the one thing that motivates me, and it's like, well, we know that it's just not enough to drive you long term with just one thing. We need like three or four things that intersect together and then align with your values to really drive that long term like dopamine and like motivation to really get you through the long term.
Mm. That's what I meant with the dopamine detox. You want to remove as much dopamine from outside sources as possible. And like you said, you want to make sure you stack as much dopamine producing activities in relation to your goal as possible. And again, like you said, curiosity, very important, but also passion and purpose. I mean, passion, that's what people say you need to love what you do. It's this entrepreneur saying that you find everywhere. You need to love what you do to be successful. But what it actually means is just being passionate about what you do. Because once again, if you love what I do, then you enjoy the activity itself. If you enjoy the activity itself, you get your dopamine from it and you get into flow easier. And in flow, your productivity is 500 times higher. So you become more effective. Then you maybe work for a higher purpose. That means you work to make a change in the world. That gives you additional, again, neurochemistry there. You get oxytocin from helping other people, for example, which also increases dopamine, by the way. Oxytocin and dopamine, that work interact with each other. It makes sense. I mean, oxytocin is the molecule that makes you bond with other people, and nature rewards bonding by releasing dopamine in your brain. So they go vice versa, those two pathways. Makes sense. So that's another reason why passion is such a big thing in helping other people. Uh, such And of course, passion, purpose, curiosity, novelty, all of the other flow triggers that we know. Novelty means that you set a bigger challenge, you strive for something new while you're at work. That means you might be dive into the literature and try to figure out that one thing that you don't understand. You read into novel literature, you find something new, you get another dopamine kick from learning something new that's related to your goals. Then you have pattern recognition. Again, you find links between the things that you have learned. Then you figure out ways to solve problems and get closer to your goal. So there are many mechanisms that you can abuse, I could almost say, and that you should use to get your dopamine from the things that you love, to keep you engaged, to stay motivated, and ultimately, of course, to leverage the flow state, because again, dopamine gets you into flow.
Yeah, yeah. And let's. I would love for us to like talk a little bit about flow.
Of
You know,
course.
some people like it's weird. You have the people that are like, "Oh, flow, that sounds cool in the zone," or "All right, cool," and then there's the people that are like, "Oh my God, tell me more!" Like, this is amazing. I need to know what's going on. And
Mm.
I I was listening to Steven on a Mind Valley episode, or actually, it was an interview he did with somebody, and he was talking about somebody he interviewed for Art of Impossible, and this guy found that flow literally flushes your body of stress hormones. It flushes your nervous system from all these stress hormones, and I was just like, "This is insane."
Mm. Now, I actually do this sometimes as well, because flow, it also releases endorphins in your brain, which are painkillers. And when I feel horrible in the morning, I had this a few times. I wake up in the morning, I have a headache, I feel really bad. And you know what I tell myself? I just start working. And once I get into flow, the work will actually quench my pain. Because again, once you get into the zone, then it all disappears anyhow. And it's actually true. As funny as it is, but the medicine I have for headache, migraine, and things like that is to just work. As stupid as it sounds, but really, just once you get into the tunnel, into the view, into the flow, again, those endorphins, they are there, and it's definitely a cool effect, side effect that you can also abuse in case you are in pain. I think Stephen even
Wow.
mentioned that I think he had an autoimmune disease when he was 30, and the only thing that kept him alive, you could almost say, uh, he was in extreme pain, as far as I remember. And the thing that kept him going was just surfing, because surfing got him into flow. And the time he surfed was the time he forgot about the pain. It disappeared. And again, that was due to the endorphins that are released.
Yeah, yeah. He had the Lyme disease,
Exactly, the Lyme one. Yeah. So
and he
crazy.
had that for like 2 years, I think. You know, he was
Mm.
like in bed for 2, 3 years. He couldn't go anywhere, and that's kind of when he discovered like his, as he calls it, the decoder ring, and what flow could do for you if you were, under baseline going through like health issues and stuff like that. And it's interesting how you talk a lot, how you were talking about having a headache and using that because that's like to reverse engineer that. It sounds like, well, being in that state of like having a headache, you're a little bit brain fatigued. You're really kind of stacking that frustration, the struggle phase, which for anybody who doesn't know, that's the first stage of flow, right? That struggle phase, that
Mm.
frustration, the cortisol, and getting those things stressed out and maxed out. And I'm sure if you kind of looked back at things and reverse engineered what you're doing, I would assume that you get into work and then you have this like break as your stage two release, so that when you come back with like clear goals and some novelty and challenge, you're 100% just dropping into flow.
Definitely. I think managing it is key. So you really want to have your flow sessions. You want to be engaged during the day, then completely switch off at the end of the day and re-engage the next day. And again, always have these big goals, big challenge that you can push that gets you into flow. I think those are the key pathways or the key things. And another thing, like you said, pain, I think it's all about reframing, because it's the same with dopamine. The way you approach something, the way you frame something can decide whether you get dopamine from an activity or not. You can, with your mind, actually impact the amount of dopamine that's released in your brain. And the best thing to show that is actually with rewards. Let's say you get a promotion at work. If you celebrate this promotion, you get a huge spike in dopamine. If you consciously do that, if you throw a party, you drink, etc., and then you get the slump the next day. You feel like shit, basically. That's the usual down you have. But on the other hand, if you consciously suppress yourself, you say, all right, I reached this promotion, cool, let's keep going, then you don't get the spike in dopamine in your brain, and you don't get the slump afterwards. So you can consciously control the amount of dopamine that's released in your brain. And again, it depends on the way you look at it, on reframing. And that's the same way I do it, how I like to do it. For me, it's completely normal to feel shit at times because I used to be anemic. And honestly, it's not fun. You just feel weak, busy all the time. It just
Yeah,
sucks. Even standing up was a challenge at times. And if you just reframe that, I do that all the time. I reframe struggle as something positive. I like it even because I like pushing myself. And again, pushing myself gets me into the flow state because I know that I need this challenge. If it doesn't feel hard for me, then it's not challenging enough for me at least. So I reframe it in a way that challenge is something desirable for me. And that's also why how I can get my dopamine from challenge. Because let's face it sucks. So for example, having a hard workout, it sucks for many people. Many people cannot stick with it. They can't go to the gym 3 times a week. They don't like the feeling associated with it. They don't like running. They don't like weight training. But on the other hand, if you like the feeling, if you're like, I love this feeling, I love the soreness I get after a hard workout session, after my squats are all burned out, if you love the feeling itself, then you get a lot of dopamine from training. You enjoy the activity. And again, it's just a way of how you frame it. Do you like the activity or do you not like the activity? If you like the activity, then you get dopamine from it. If you don't like the activity, then you don't get dopamine from it. And it probably just sucks. And of
yeah.
course, again, reframing, one of the best ways to actually get you going.
Yeah, and it goes back to the destination goal and the process goal. Like, do you just,
Exactly.
what are you after, and what's the goal? And it just goes right back into having that process goal and enjoying the process, the journey, and falling in love with what you do rather than that end goal. Which let's face it, right? Is there really an end to anything we do besides us dying, right?
Yeah. And in fact, I would actually argue it's a bad thing if you don't have a goal anymore, because then you get the what now feeling, the what now thought. That's what many entrepreneurs have. So in my opinion, that's why we have the massive transformative purpose anyhow, this almost unreachable, unrealistic goal, just so that there is always a goal. Because the reality is, if you want to get better for the rest of your life, if you want to make progress for the rest of your life, then you better have always a goal. You never really want to reach the end. Because the problem is when you reach the end and there's no goal inside anymore, then there's no reason to improve. There's nothing to get your dopamine from. And then you fall into this big hole, into this slump, into nothingness, sorry. And again, that's the cause of many mental issues, mental disorders, in fact. And that's the feeling of emptiness. And the feeling of emptiness is nothing, is simply put, not having a goal, not having no purpose, having no passion, having nothing to do, nothing to shoot for. So I would argue you should always have a goal, because the goal, again, that keeps you motivated, it keeps you driven.
Yeah, and being in that slump of nothingness is a very
Mm.
dangerous place to be.
Oh yeah, definitely. If you're just stuck, it's like in a pit hole. You don't. The problem is, if there's no goal, then you will not climb out of the hole because there's no reason for you to. There's nothing that motivates you to get out of the hole.
Right? Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Nicholas, I really appreciate all of your knowledge, your time, everything that you shared with us. I would love for you to share where anybody can find you, your YouTube channel, your blog, your website, and also share, really, what you're trying to do and the impact that you're trying to make on the world.
Definitely. First and foremost, thank you for inviting me here. We had some audio issues in the beginning, by the way. That's why it took a while. My freaking laptop crashed on me here. But that aside, definitely, I have my own YouTube channel, which is Raven Neuroscience and High Performance. So Raven like the bird, Raven Neuroscience and High Performance. You can find me on LinkedIn, Niklas Philipp Reich. And of course, other than that, for those guys of you who are also in the Flow Research Collective, just message me. Always around. Message me or Gemini, of course. And yeah, all that is left to say is that you hopefully have a nice evening, guys.
Awesome, Niklas. I appreciate your time.
Okay, see you then.